Hello and welcome to Humans of Gaming. I'm your host, Drew Dixon. I am the chief content nerd at Love Thy Nerd. Humans of Gaming is part of the Love Thy Nerd podcast network. I'm joined, as almost always, by my co-host, Chris Weltney. Hey, Chris.
It kind of seemed like you forgot your name there for a minute. Like you
Did
took
it?
a little bit more of a beat than
You know what I did is
What?
that I almost called this a different name of a podcast that I used to do.
Close call there.
Yeah, that would have been awkward.
Hey, I'm Chris. I'm the chief executive nerd with Love Thy Nerd, and here we are.
Here we are. Chris, you were just traveling. You were just in kind of this part of the world a little bit, like the Midwest kind of.
We're in Columbus, Ohio, because apparently when you live in Southern California, you have to vacation to the Midwest, I guess.
You vacation there and you'd sort of like dream about what if your cost of living was like somewhat sensible.
Right. Yeah. That's
Sorry. I had to throw that in there.
You just triggered me.
I just want you to move to this part of the world so I can see more. That's all it is.
We'll figure it out.
So we have a very special guest on this podcast, as we almost always do, and that's Jamie Madigan. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, guys. I think very special guest, maybe overselling it a little bit, but special guest I think we could go with.
Reasonably special.
That's right. Moderately special guest.
Yeah.
Marginally special.
I invited you to come on this podcast because I've been reading your book, which I really love. It's called Getting Gamers: The Psychology of Video Games and Their Impact on the People Who Play Them. Cool. So that's kind of what made me think to ask you to come on. I've really been enjoying this, getting a lot out of like understanding myself as a gamer, understanding all my friends and the people that we serve through Love Thy Nerd who are super into games. Like just trying to get into their headspace and understand how they tick has been really, really cool and really helpful. So, but yeah, I guess give us like, how would you introduce yourself aside from having written this book? You also have a website and some other things. Yeah. Tell us what you're about, what you do.
Sure. So I am, as you mentioned, Jamie Madigan. I have a PhD in psychology, specifically industrial organizational psychology. And I have a day job where I apply that IO psychology background, but I also do the whole psychology of games thing on the side and nights, weekends, and spare time. And essentially the shortest way to describe that is that I look at the overlap between psychology and games. So I look at like what the psychology literature and models and theory have to say about like why does good or successful game design work? When it does, why do those tropes of game designs work? What happens to people when we play games? And sort of what is some of the psychology behind why games are marketed and sold the way that they are? So I have a website where I post text articles every month. And then I also have a podcast where kind of like what you guys do here, I'll have guests from the industry and academics and researchers and people who work and do sort of psychology or related field work related to video games. And each episode will kind of tackle a question that guest expert will weigh in on, and we'll have a discussion. So yeah, that's the short of it.
And so how did you get moving down that path of saying like, I want to apply my ideas, my thoughts on psychology, kind of applying the science that I do day in and day out to this medium?
It was like almost 10 years ago now. It was 2009. And I had just gone through sort of like a reading binge, reading up on things like behavioral economics and the psychology around decision making. And it was a lot of
easy stuff.
Yeah, just some light beach reading.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this stuff's really interesting. And it explains so much about consumer behavior in general, right? And like how we make decisions and why we do what we do. And I thought somebody should really like write about this in the context of video games, because I kept thinking about like, oh, well, that's why, games are designed this way, or that's why the pricing tiers in games are designed this way. And I thought, well, I could do that. I'm somebody, any schmuck can set up a blog these days. And so I did that. In like late 2009, wrote a bunch of articles, and I had intended it just to be kind of a little blogging experiment, maybe do it for a few months and have some fun with it. But it kind of caught on, got a lot of people from the industry who would come back regularly and comment. And so I kept it up. And then eventually I thought, well, I should write a book about this. And so I went through the whole process of like finding literary agent and having her like shop the book around and then go through the whole contract process and just as a first time person, figuring this all out and then actually like writing the book and then having that come out. And about the time that I was wrapping up the book, I thought, like what's better than text is listening to people talk. So I decided to start a podcast about that time. And just posted my 41st episode. I publish about one a month. And just published the 41st episode of that recently. And that's been a lot of fun as well.
That's cool. I want to I want to push back a little bit because I feel like you're slightly underselling yourself because I think this book is, I think it's really substantive. Like you clearly put a ton of research into this. I thought this just stuck out to me on the back cover of your book, a quote from Ian Bogost. And he said, "For years now, Madigan has served as the unofficial psychologist of the games industry. If you want to understand how human behavior and games interact, this is the book for you." And I'm not nearly as smart as Ian Bogost.
Yeah, thanks, Ian.
But like that's a really cool, like that's saying something about the work that you've done in this space. Like when someone who's studied games at a really high level, like Ian Bogost is saying, "Hey, this is the guy that you ought to be reading on this subject if you understand kind of how games work and how they're interacting with our brains and that kind of thing."
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was cool.
Yeah. And specifically psychology, because when I started this, that was kind of a hole in the market. There were people obviously that were doing research in the realms of psychology and economics and communication around video games. Although that's an area that's exploded recently. But there weren't a lot of outlets that were kind of trying to straddle the line between being academic and being entertaining. And for better or worse, that was my target. And I'll leave it up to everybody else to figure out how close I came to hitting it. But, the website, like it's the articles that I write on there have citations, where I'll say in this particular study or this particular theoretical, article that you can find in this refereed journal or this book, they talk about this and that can be applied to video games in the following ways. So I'd have footnotes that were citations, but I'd also have footnotes that were stupid jokes, that I had written to try to be funny. And I tried to make the tone of the website and then the book later to be both academic and like entertaining. Because these are video games, and for the most part, video games are played for funsies. And that doesn't mean that there aren't serious questions to be addressed around them, but they're always existing in that context of fun and entertainment. And I tried to make sure that everything I do reflects that.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Like, I have not yet read it cover to cover. I think about halfway.
That's okay.
Now.
We'll wait. Go ahead.
But in my experience with the book, I'm not a psychologist. I find psychology interesting, so I'm maybe like slightly more interested in psychology than the average person, but definitely don't know the terms, don't know the lingo, and I found it pretty accessible. So, so I definitely like recommend it to our listeners. If you're curious about what games are doing to you and why you act certain ways when you play them, definitely check it out. Just to give some examples to our listeners, there's a chapter called "Why Do Perfectly Normal People Become Raving Lunatics Online?" So we've all like experienced that, right? Like when you're playing a game and someone makes you feel awful, or maybe you find yourself being like a horrible person as you play. Like there's a chapter there for you. So another one is how do games get us to grind, complete side quests and chase achievements. A buddy of mine and I were just talking about like some of the new games that are out. My friend was complaining about the new Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and was talking about how he just found himself sinking hours into this and then realizing the stuff he was doing in it was so stupid.
Trivial, yeah. It doesn't lead to any progress in a bigger picture, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
And he was like, and so I was
leads
like,
towards progress of that platinum trophy.
Right. There, I was like, there's a chapter in this book. You need to read it, and it'll help you.
Are you talking about Clausen?
No. Although he falls into that camp for sure.
Yeah. Our podcast producer he's
a completionist.
Through and through.
And yeah, you should read that chapter. I'm not sure it'll change anything, but at least maybe he'll understand.
It'll fix him.
Yeah, maybe he'll understand himself better. So anyway, but there's all kinds of stuff here. There's, it's really, I think, really helpful to getting into some of the biggest issues that the gamers face. So yeah, Chris, I think you had a question before we get in here too far from one of our
yeah. So we try to, with all of our episodes, get our listeners and our biggest supporters involved. So we have a group of folks that every month give money towards making Love Thy Nerd happen, making our podcast happen, our website, our outreach events, our community. And one of those supporters who couldn't be here with us today did have a question, and this comes from Kyle Matthews. And he wanted to ask, what's the biggest misconception outsiders have about video games? I'm assuming by outsiders, he means like maybe people that don't play video games or people that don't know a lot about video games or that kind of thing. But he's looking for your super smart doctor expertise. So don't let us
what
down.
I'm annoyed by that people don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think there's potentially a few different answers to that. One is just that games are bigger than most people assume. The average age of a gamer is much older, and many more women play games and girls play games than people would probably guess. So the demographics of it is one thing. But I'd also say that like games are so encompassing now and broad of a concept. And, your AAA PC and console games like Assassin's Creed and, Red Dead Redemption, like those are a big part of the market, but a lot of people also play, indie games, and they play smaller games, and they play games on their phone or their tablet. And there's just a lot more variety than you typically hear about if you don't swim in those waters, normally and don't play games yourself. And, a side effect of that is that games have a positive impact on a lot of people. There's a lot of people who have made friends, within games, online multiplayer games, massively multiplayer games, people that have developed relationships that are in many ways just as good and in a few ways better than sort of face-to-face relationships and friendships that they have in person. There's a fair amount of really interesting research on that concept of like what good is an online relationship.
In what ways might they be better? That piqued my curiosity.
So a lot of times when people have these friendships and these relationships with people that they don't meet in person, and they're pretty sure they will never meet in person, they feel a lot more safe in how much they'll disclose, for example, to somebody, and how intimate they can become, how quickly they can become. And sometimes that can be very helpful for people, if they're dealing with issues or if they're frustrated by something going on in their life, for them to vent, where you wouldn't necessarily do that to your brother or your friend or your coworker, because you've got a relationship to maintain there, and you got to kind of weigh, like, well, what's this going to make me look like, and how are they going to react in the long term? So that's one way. Where those relationships don't tend to be as effective is that you can't hit up your guildmate in World of Warcraft for gas money, right? or like a ride.
That's a benefit to the person being
hit true.
Up,
so maybe it goes both ways.
Yeah, but you hear lots of stories. Like I certainly have friends who've like been in each other's weddings and they met on World of Warcraft and stuff. So there a lot of times that does translate into some real world things. But,
so I wanted to hit on something you said right at the beginning when you were answering that question, because this has always been such a weird phenomena to me, and I'm curious about your guys' thoughts. More so Jamie than Drew, because I hear Drew's thoughts all the time.
PhD.
Yeah, that's right. So you just at the very beginning, you mentioned like video games is a thing that is really big that people don't know about. And that is so bizarre to me. Like Red Dead Redemption, $720 million or 725, whatever it was, in like 3 days, eclipsing Infinity Wars. And we know how big like everyone knew about Infinity Wars, like even 65-year-old grandmas, like it's a big deal. And it's so bizarre to me that video games as an industry, just in terms of dollars or even viewership, Twitch, all that stuff, like it is so big, like bigger than anything. And it still seems underground. And that's such a weird phenomenon to me.
And I think that a lot of that stuff is gradually changing. But it takes time and it takes generations of people. And I think sort of like the line between a lot of that stuff is blurring too. Like what's the difference between Twitch and social media in general? They're both sort of social media. It's just that one focuses more on gaming typically, although you have a lot of Twitch streamers that do non-gaming stuff as well. But yeah, it is kind of surprising. And you even look at things like mobile games, like how many people are playing Candy Crush or whatever the new hot thing is coming out. And it's a lot more people than are going to see the biggest blockbuster movie that week or that month. It's a lot more people that are watching network TV in some cases. A lot of people are doing both, right? So it's not an either or. It's not a competition for the most part. Although I don't watch much TV these days while I'm playing these big games that are coming out around the holiday release.
Right.
But it's huge, and a lot of people don't realize it. And the fact is that if you're not a gamer, you probably have somebody close to you who is.
What you said there at the end about like people that know gamers, I've always thought of it like you remember the game, the like 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you can like within 7 moves, you can get to Kevin Bacon with any actor because he's just been in so many movies with other actors. Like I've always kind of explained it like the 1 degree of a gamer. Like it's just so big that everybody can just draw one line and they've got like a major gamer in their life, like husband, aunt, uncle, kid, cousin.
And I think
friend,
that term
anybody.
gamer is subject to some disagreement and some discussion, like what is a gamer? And I'm not a gatekeeper on who's a gamer and who's not. I don't ever try to tell anybody they are or aren't, but there are differences between somebody who will play a game for 20, 30 hours in a week and somebody who plays a mobile game like on their phone while they're on the subway or whatever. But I think they're all being touched by the gaming industry, and they're all those two different kinds of games rely a lot on the same kind of psychology to keep players engaged and to keep them interested and make sure they have fun.
Yeah. And in one sense, I guess it's like, part of me is like, well, who cares if we consider ourselves gamers or not? Like, we don't call ourselves book readers or movie goers very often, but it does speak to the fact that a lot of people do call them gamers, does speak to the depth at which a lot of people play and engage with video games. But I do think that the fact that a lot of people sort of balk, a lot of people who probably are like quote unquote gamers because they play games on a pretty regular basis, don't want to consider themselves that way, I think probably speaks to the importance of like your book and the work that you're doing, because I think it's important that we as human beings like take stock of how we're spending our time and like what we're engaging with and like how that's impacting us, and the ways in which it's a really good part of our lives and the ways that maybe it's not, like I just think that's part of being a healthy human being. So and the fact that people don't sort of balk at the title, I think speaks to the necessity of what you're doing. But we sort of got into this a little bit, but I think it's a big topic these days of like when games become maybe an unhealthy part of our life. There's a lot of talk these days, and I think it's coming up because of Fortnite and things. A lot of frustrated parents.
Fortnite, sweet Fortnite.
A lot of parents are frustrated about the level at which their kids are playing games. But it's not just kids; it's like people in general. And we see this a lot. Chris and I do as Christians who are involved in churches and are kind of connected to that world. There's a lot of people in the church who sort of balk at games because they think of their kids playing Fortnite, or they think of their buddy at work who they're pretty sure is a little bit too into video games. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about how do we know when a game becomes like too much or it's taking more from us than it's giving?
I mean, generally speaking, I think that if it's interfering with your other responsibilities, that's the answer to your question. So if it's precluding you from doing your homework or getting to work on time or taking care of your kids or having the social life that you want to have or need to have, then it's a problem. And then you can figure out how to balance those things. And it's ultimately up to the person to do that. But that's the short answer, is that like if it starts to interfere with these other priorities in your life. And then that's sort of complicated by the fact that a lot of times you may see somebody or hear about somebody who goes what looks like overboard into a game, be like, oh man, I played for, I played Red Dead for 11 hours yesterday on a Saturday. And maybe that's okay because like they're off work. They don't have any other responsibilities. Or maybe like your kid just wants to sit and play Fortnite, but it's summer break and they don't have a lot else going on. And, the fact that they sit and play for 4 to 6 hours in a day is not as big an issue as it would be if school were in session and they had school and homework to do. So context is important, and what else is going on is important.
I think it's like there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions with stuff like that. You hear somebody played for 6 hours straight, and like you said, like, oh well, that's just automatically bad. But there's so much context, and there's just not a lot of times. And I think for parents too, there's just not a lot of black and white answers sometimes. Yeah. Like it's very fluid and organic, and you have to be flexible and bend and change and be in constant conversation with your kids about whether it's video games or anything else, about boundaries and things like that, because kids are always going to push the boundaries. I mean, crap, adults push boundaries.
Right.
So I think there's just it's much more fluid than having a black, I can remember for me growing up, like my parents took a very black and white approach. Like you get 1 hour a day if you're lucky, and that's it.
And so what did you do in those other hours of the day?
So just curled up in the corner in the fetal position and sucked my thumb and cried simultaneously. Yeah.
Cried for Fortnite.
Gosh, I don't know.
No, I'm kidding. You weren't. Fortnite wasn't around then. But.
I probably schemed for ways to get more than an hour, or I'd just go over to my friend's house and play.
It's interesting because like I didn't get a lot of, my parents didn't like, there would be times I remember when they would be like, all right, it's time to go outside and turn off the games. But by and large, they didn't really monitor what I was doing that much. And now, like, I think I have pretty responsible gaming habits. Like, it's not an issue for me to turn it off, or, it doesn't get in the way. It very rarely gets in the way of my relationships with my kids or my wife. And in the rare instance that it does, my wife's like, hey, you're playing that a bit too much. And that's it. Like, I like it snaps and I'm like, oh, yep. You're right. I need to.
The sun's down. Yep. We should do something
here. Yeah. But I was just talking to a friend over the weekend that's like, I mean, they're in the weeds with Fortnite with their son. They were doing this, like, they read some book about logic, about speaking to your kids with love and logic or something. And my friend was telling me that, they were like, they made him decide 1 hour a day, or he can play as much as he wants on the weekends. And he chose 1 hour a day. And so on the weekend came, and he was upset that it's the weekend and he only gets to play 1 hour, even though that's what
all of his friends are online playing.
That's what he chose. Right. Yeah. And so he was like, exactly. And he was like, I just wish I could be in a different family. I wish I could leave. I just don't want to be a part of this family anymore. And, yeah, so like he was, he packed up his stuff and like went outside and tried to put up a tent outside, live away from him.
Man, if Norman Rockwell were painting pictures today, that would be a perfect subject.
Yeah,
but so I don't know, like if you have any insight, or like if you were talking to a parent who's in it that deep, if you have advice.
One thing is. Yeah, I mean, everybody's different, right? So everybody's circumstances are different. But generally, I think that gaming can be an opportunity as well. So, my older daughter went through a period where she was very much into games, and she played like competitive online shooters. This was actually before Fortnite blew up. So she was playing like Team Fortress 2, and then she moved on to Overwatch. And she would play in like the competitive tournaments and not tournaments, but the competitive mode, career. Like
how high did she get
she made
on Overwatch?
To high gold. I'm not sure she ever cracked platinum.
Okay.
But, she was. She's 14 now, so this would have been like maybe a couple of years ago. So she was doing pretty well, and I played with her a lot. So we'd sit, and I have a couple of gaming PCs in the house, and one's actually up in my office, and the other one is down in it's kind of the basement. And we'd put on the headsets and we'd play. And then prior to that, like we would play cooperative games on the consoles, like the Lego games, like Lego Star Wars, Lego Harry Potters. Those are great games for younger kids and adults or siblings to play together. Yeah. And for us, it was very much something we would do together and fun time. And it's stuff that like we'd both look forward to. And we would sit there and play for hours, and it wouldn't be a big deal because we were spending time together. And then, we'd come back to the dinner table and annoy like my wife and my other daughter, because like we'd talk about, games like, oh, did you see like, the new map that's going to come out next week? Or did you hear rumors about this new hero that, is going to come out in Overwatch? And like, we'd talk about it and we'd bond over it. Yeah. So, if you can do that, great. If you're a gamer, great. You're probably not that concerned about it, maybe in that case anyway. But even just like watching them and talking to them about it and using it as an opportunity to like converse with your kids, especially as kids get older, it sometimes gets more difficult as your world and theirs sort of start to move away and they get their own social circles and interests. It's sometimes a challenge to find common ground and things to talk about. So a lot of times they're very interested in talking about that stuff, especially if you play and if you're knowledgeable about it and not like pandering or just kind of fishing for conversation.
I sympathize with, parents who are struggling with this. I think it can, like, there's aspects of things like Fortnite and stuff that I'm not like super, or that I get why it produces like a fear of missing out in kids such that they keep coming back to it. And I get it. But I also think what you said is really valuable because if all kids are hearing from their parents about this kind of stuff is just rules, like, I think we're missing an opportunity there, right? Like there's no effort to understand what your kid's into. They're not going to feel very loved. And I think maybe just a little bit of effort to like get to know what they're into, even if you're not into it yourself, just to try to understand it and talk with them about it could probably go a long way. And them being a little bit, I don't know, potentially more accepting of the rules you're laying down. I don't have like data to back that up, but
and it's also important to understand like why are they into this game so much? So like why do they want to play? And that can only come about through conversation and observation. So are they playing so much because they are finding experiences in that game that are more fulfilling than what they're getting in real life? Because games are designed in such a way to make us feel competent and make us feel a sense of progression and make us feel important to other people. And a lot of times kids don't get that. A lot of times adults don't get that. And that's the same reason that we play games so much as well. Or maybe they're doing it to cope with some anxiety issues that they're having or some social, issues. Like this is the only way that I can really like comfortably interact with people, or I get anxious when, trying to go to after school activities and interact with people face to face. And so sort of understanding that can help you as a parent figure out like what you need to do in response.
Right. Yeah. It's funny, like anytime a parent, will be talking to me about, GTA 5 is always the hot button one. And I just tell them like, why don't you ask your kid why they want to run over prostitutes? Like, just ask them. Like, are they doing that because they're a sociopath? Money. Probably not. They're just doing it because they think it's funny, or they drop money so they can buy a better car to run over prostitutes with. Like, just ask about it, And I think that the word that you guys are using, that opportunity word, like that's how I think about, my upbringing is I'm not like mad at my parents. I don't think anyway. But it's more so like I'm just bummed because I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities for us to connect more, like for them to engage in that and for us to have, memories of whatever. And it's not that you didn't have those in other ways, but I think video games was such a big part of my life. And that's all I ever tell parents is like, hey, just get in there. Like we do it with football. We do it with soccer. We do it with any number of other extracurricular things. Like, why not do it with this thing and just get in there and get your hands dirty and find out
even
how your kid ticks.
Yeah. And just for the record, I did want to say one thing for the record, like we're not advocating that anybody get games for their kids that are inappropriate for their age level. So if you're upset about what Chris said, just email him, Chris@lovelinerd.com.
Yeah.
About GTA 5. Anyway,
I was going to mention that even if you do all this and understand and use it as an opportunity to bond and grow closer and all that, like ultimately you're still the parent, and it's okay for you if you decide that no, you need to take a break, or no, I'm signing you up for soccer because you need to be part of a sport, a team oriented sports.
Yeah.
That
diversify.
That is still ultimately your prerogative, as a parent. Kids are stupid and they don't always know. Maybe stupid's not the right word, but they're they have limited wisdom and limited perspective. And you as the parent, you as the adult can sort of set limits and boundaries, and sometimes you should.
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on some of the talk that's going around the industry now about potentially like regulating some games because of their like addictive qualities. So I'm trying to think of who I've seen. I know I've read some articles where people, and this is not just coming from like angry parents or something. Like there's actually people in the industry that are making this this claim. I think I saw an article by Peter Farquhar, I don't know how to say his last name, about this issue with regard to Fortnite. And then I know Jonathan Blow has talked about this some as well. Jonathan Blow, who made The Witness and Braid. So kind of one of the pioneers of the indie game movement. I'd be curious to hear.
It was a couple years ago, or they passed some regulations in the EU or something, didn't they?
Yeah, there are some in the UK, I believe. Is that right, Jamie? Do you know? Around like warning labels
boxes
and things like that.
I'm not sure, although I know that
games.
They've certainly been very sensitive to that, and they have come out with their version of the ESRB, the PEGI rating system, and it will. I think they're required to notify consumers of certain things that the game contains.
Right. Yeah. So do you think there should be some regulation, or at least like some warning labels about things like loot boxes or games that use like mechanics with Fortnite, where it's kind of encouraging you to keep playing, or else you have to spend real world money if you want, those skins
generally
or
I'm
or whatever.
Less in favor of the government stepping in and trying to ham-fistedly fix this sort of stuff, as opposed to the industry itself figuring it out and self-policing, much like they did with ratings, like the ESRB ratings, where like back in the early to mid 90s, and people on Capitol Hill screaming about Mortal Kombat, and that whole stuff started to precipitate. And one of the resolutions of that was the rating system. So like, okay, this is appropriate for these age groups, and then there's like tags where they can say it depicts like alcohol consumption or that kind of thing. So I'm generally in favor of the industry figuring it out for themselves and fixing the problem themselves, because I think the government has a poor to moderate track record in terms of how well they address that sort of stuff. More information is always better, right? So if you can put in somewhere on the box or have some sort of supplement to your marketing material or information about the game that says like, hey, this game offers in-game purchases, and this game offers loot boxes, or some words to that effect, where random, you have an opportunity to spend money to get random rewards, then that's going to be valuable for anybody who's looking at that game and to see whether or not it's their bag. And this stuff's blown up a lot in the last year or two, right? So it was sort of being addressed a lot before, and then there was the Star Wars Battlefront 2, which pushed it to the forefront, where it very much had like the pay to win mechanics, where you could spend real money to unlock or have a greater chance of unlocking things that would give you a competitive advantage in this very competitive, competition oriented game. And
it's interesting that like people, like gamers, kind of policed that one. Like, you know what I mean? Like they
sure did.
freaked out about EA's decision, and EA,
they radically redesigned parts of that game, and they pulled the plug on their online store, and they did a lot of really drastic damage control. And then you look at like some of the language that they're using for, what is it, what's the next Battlefield game that's coming out later this year? but they're being like very careful and very
lose track
specific
of
in the way
those.
they're addressing the whether or not those kinds of mechanics will be in the game,
Mhm.
or whether they'll be in at launch versus coming later, and so forth.
Yeah, and it's interesting that like gamers are totally fine with like Overwatch or Fortnite when it's just like cosmetic stuff primarily that you can spend money on, or loot boxes. They're like, oh yeah, great, fine. Give me a chance to put that coin in the slot machine and pull the lever. Like, totally good with that. But if it's like a pay to win mechanic, it's like,
well, I think a lot of it, like you put your finger on, comes down to whether or not it gives you an advantage over other players. And there's been research on like envy and the attitudes that players have towards other players who have done something like that, where they've bought a competitive advantage instead of earning it in game, and that they view it that way in some ways, cheating, and they'll be like, well, I don't want to party with this person, party up in like a group with this person. I don't want to, I won't congratulate them. I don't want to accept their friend request. Like they're much less likely to do those kinds of things if they perceive that the other person has bought some sort of advantage or gotten it unfairly. But they don't have the same attitude where, like, if you just leveled up by playing the game and earned a loot box and got something cool out of it from random chance, then those attitudes are not as severe or completely absent.
There's part of me that sympathizes with the pay to win idea, because I remember like being pretty fresh, like maybe it's changed now, but several years ago playing one of the Call of Duty games, and it was like a level up system where the more you played, you could get some different like loadout bonuses and things, like a better loadout and things. And I just convinced myself that that's why I was terrible, was because I hadn't played it enough, and I was playing against people that had a better loadout. And I might have actually spent money on that if I could just buy the better loadout rather than earning it. But I get it. I get why. And that sort of speaks to how gamers, I think, a lot of times think. Like, if there's anything we hate, it's the idea of people like cheating to get an advantage or not earning it,
I wonder if maybe there are. I've never really looked, but like, I'd love to see the statistics about the demographics of people that are actually doing the pay to win stuff. Like, is it mostly kids that are taking their parents' card to do it? Or is it people like our age who are old and tired, but have money and would rather, like we don't have 6 hours a day to play games.
Yeah.
But we've got some money and we can take some shortcuts with that money. Like, I'd be interested to see what.
Yeah, I can't point you to a source, but
what the stats,
at least anecdotally, and I think I've read some stuff that says that it's usually older people who have money that are the ones that spend it, right? Because kids either don't have money or they don't have access to a credit card that's needed to buy through these games, through these systems. Although I hope they don't mind if I tell this story, but like one of our friends in our neighborhood teenage son, like racked up $400 on his parents' credit card in Rainbow Six Siege add-ons earlier this year. And they got the billing statement without their permission. Yeah, and they got the billing statement and just exploded. Sure. And it was like the nuclear option. Like, okay, you are not allowed to touch a keyboard. You cannot use the computer, period. Don't tell me it's for school. Use the Chromebook that they give you for that stuff. For like a long time. So that stuff does happen, but I imagine that it's relatively rare, thankfully.
Yeah. You got to lock that stuff down. My kids are not. We make sure if they're ever on an iPad or anything like that, all that stuff's locked down so they can't waste a bunch of our money. Because my daughter would buy every stupid app, in-app purchase in these games that she plays on there every now and then. But
sounds exhausting to have kids. I'm glad I don't have them yet.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you have like conversations with? You said, I guess one of your daughters is a gamer, is the other one not?
Both of them kind of are in and out of it. One of them the younger one was into Roblox, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, but it's like a platform. It looks like Minecraft, but it's more like a platform for a ton of different games. And she was like super intensely into that, and then I think she felt like she aged out of it, or she burned out, and now she's on to like watching like game product review unboxing videos on YouTube for some reason I can't fathom. But and Yeah, my older one
Yeah.
was very much into it, and she still does occasionally play some stuff with her friends, but she's into other stuff now. But they may go back.
Okay. So when they were playing games, would you have like conversations with them about these kind of things that you're researching, like achievements or or how loot boxes work or things? Or you tell them like, do you realize that this is like basically like a Pavlovian response? Or
I mean, I never like had to have a conversation because they did something. Because I kind of put the fear of God into them early on, saying like, okay, any device you ever make an unauthorized purchase on, you lose access to that device forever. And yeah, I mean, I was like, this is non-negotiable. This is, and it's never happened, thankfully, that I know of. But I would talk to them about it. Yeah. I mean, especially if I was like just watching them play or playing with them, and I'd say like, oh yeah, there's this psychological theory that says this is driving you to want to play one more match so that you can get up to the next level, for example, or whatever. No. You ruin everything. Like,
shut up, Dad. I need to play.
Dad, I just want to play.
Just shut up and tell everybody to subscribe to your Twitch channel. But yeah, no, I would have like just sort of anecdotes about them too that I would sometimes use in my podcast, like talk about stuff that they have done or observing things that they did. Because I don't play a lot of Roblox, but it was interesting, to talk to my daughter and see her experiences playing it.
Yeah. Do they listen? Like, when you have these, do you feel like it's helped them have get more out of?
I don't know
the games they play.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, especially the older one. Yeah, right. They write their own books.
Maybe they'll tell you one day when they're 20.
Yeah, the older one maybe more so because she's more thoughtful in that way and more introspective. And then the younger one is much more high energy, less introspective, more just like, I want to tell you everything about my day and everything that I've done. And no, shut up. Don't try to explain it. I'm still telling you about, my day. So they're very different in that way.
What are you, one of the big things about your book, Getting Gamers, is the impact of games on the people who play them. I'm curious if you could give us like a couple of things, like what are the best things that games have to offer us? Like what are the some like the top good things we're getting?
So
as human beings,
in some ways this kind of ties into the stuff that we were just talking about. I think one of the major things that I can point to for games is that they are a gateway to new skills for a lot of people. So a lot of people got their start in coding, or writing or creating art because they wanted to either just do something to celebrate their favorite game, or they wanted to actually create like a mod or, their own game or something along those lines. Back in the day, like I learned HTML and CSS in the early days of the web so that I could make fan sites for my games. And that sort of led to, other opportunities. Oh gosh. So the first one I did something for was Quake games? 2. And I did other stuff for like, cool. What was it? I did some stuff for Quake 3 as well. An old game called Hexen 2 from Activision. It was a first.
Yeah, I remember.
Those were like Quake engine games. Yeah.
Those were like, I remember
stuff like that. And then that sort of led to me having the opportunity to do some like freelance writing about games and game reviews and other types of writing. And then that led to some opportunities for me to work in the games journalism area for a few years. And then that all ultimately led, to the psychology of game stuff. And my older daughter is very artistic, and she would make drawings. She would draw like stuff from the game she was playing and make fan art and so forth. And she learned to do digital art in like Photoshop or a Photoshop-like program, with a tablet and all that sort of stuff. So, and lots of other people, like I said, learn sound design or they learn podcasting or they learn coding because of their passion for games, and they wanted to contribute something to the community through that. And the other big thing that I think the benefit that games have on people is that they make them happy. They make them, enjoy life, and they make them enjoy what they're doing. And there's a fair amount of research in the psychology field to show that doing things like that you enjoy, including games, reduces stress and helps you cope with stress. And it makes you like a better more easygoing and more productive person when you go into work or school the next day. If you've had some fun, be it through video games or some other hobby or sport or whatever that you enjoy. And so it's video. There's such a low barrier to entry for playing games. That's a source of stress reduction and enjoyment for a lot of people. Where I can't get 9 other people together to play baseball or whatever. I don't know. However many people are needed for baseball. I have no idea. That tells you how much I know about sports. Yeah. I think so. That sounds right.
Ball.
Yeah.
It's 9, right?
Sure.
Isn't it 9?
I think I thought it was like 11. I don't know. Baseball is my least favorite sport.
Football's 11. This is terrible. I mean, there's so many people cringing right now.
I actually do like sports. Baseball's like I hate it. It's my least favorite. So
baseball's boring. Boo.
It's interesting though what you said about games making us feel good, because I'd be curious to hear if you agree with this, Chris, as someone who kind of has spent some time in the church with Christians and things. But I think that's like a hard one for Christians to accept. You know what I mean? Like they hear that one of the values of games is that they make people feel good, and then I think there's like some Christians that
only
hear that
Jesus
like,
should make you feel good,
right? So like only Jesus should make you feel good, or that must mean that games are like an idol or something that people are. Whereas like there's all kinds of other things that we do primarily because they make us feel better about ourselves or whatever, or we just enjoy them. Like reading books or even watching films to some degree, or even some TV shows that were like, oh no, that's fine, but like don't play a video game to feel good about yourself. You must be like, that must be an unhealthy coping mechanism.
Totally.
Whereas like I think gosh, I would like to see a lot more Christians just have a general attitude of like we want our kids to feel generally good about themselves. We want, and not just our kids, but like people in general. Like if someone's doing something because it helps them alleviate some of their anxiety, or just gives them a chance to decompress and be happy for a little bit. Like why is that? Why do we think of that as a bad thing? Yeah.
God forbid it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love my wife. This will connect, I promise, because she's not like a gamer at all. Video games, board games, none of it. But she's a big reader. She loves reading fiction. And she will like ardently defend video games to like she's a part of these like ladies groups, so it tends to be like a lot of older ladies, and kind of and they'll just get going on some rant about how video games are just the devil, and she will defend it tooth and nail because she's like, it's so much more interactive than, she's like, when I'm reading, like I'm literally just sitting there hallucinating for hours. Like at least with a video game, there's agency and interaction and like activity. And I just, it still blows my mind. Or people that, I know of that will spend 4 hours a day watching TV, and it's so passive, and it's fine. Like I watch TV too, but what bugs me is when it's like those comparisons start to happen, and somehow video games always end up
communications literature, they call that co-creating. Like video game experiences are co-created between the player and the designers of the game, and any one of those groups by themselves doesn't accomplish anything with a video game. It takes both of them.
Yeah, like we're working on a collaborative article that we're going to publish hopefully on Love Thy Nerd here pretty soon. Called
it's going to be a long article.
We accidentally committed in Red Dead Redemption 2.
I am, yeah. I accidentally shot a guy in the face, like trying to say hello.
Are you it, Jamie?
I think so many, because the controllers are so contextual and so kind of wonky.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. The same button to like hold to interact with people and say hi or diffuse a situation is the same button that you would also maybe cause you to draw out your gun. So it's a common problem. But anyway, all that to say, like, it's really funny to see how unique people's stories are interacting with that game. It really is one of those instances where someone makes a game and then hands it over to players, and they don't know exactly what kind of experience they're going to have. Like they have some ideas, but that's part of what makes it really a really unique medium to engage with. I'd be curious to hear though, if you, Jamie, have had experience like talking to really religious people about that subject. of like, games making us feel good or that kind of thing. Have you had to address any of those kind of questions of people who are kind of up in arms about it? Well, it's a fake, feeling good about yourself. You're doing that in a fictionary world. Like, how can that be healthy?
That kind of, for lack of a better word, puritanical view of, anything that makes you feel.
Sure.
Yeah. Anything
that's
pleasurable is bad. The shortcut version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can't say that I have, and I talked to plenty of religious people.
Lucky you.
What's that? But
lucky you.
Yeah, most of the concerns are around like, how is this affecting my kids' health or their school or their social health, social life.
I asked the question of what are the, give us a couple of the ways that video games are impacting us in healthy ways and ways that are good, some of the benefits of games. I do want us to try to like make an effort to be honest to our listeners, people who might be listening to this who are concerned about some of the shortcomings. What do you see as some of like the shortcomings or things you would say to people, like things are things you need to be aware of as you play games, as you engage with them, kind of like the top 2 or so things.
Yeah, they're really expensive. A new game is $60, and then you can pump money into games and after or in-game purchases. But besides that, and there's certainly ways around that. One of the biggest problems that I think the gaming community and game developers kind of share is toxic behavior online. So there's a whole, as I think you mentioned it earlier, I've got a whole chapter on this in my book about the psychology behind toxic behavior. Why are people screaming lunatics, and why are they mean? And what are the psychological roots behind that? And then interestingly, how those same psychological theories can explain why people are cooperative and nice in certain situations. But that is, I think that's sort of another stigma that gets attached to gamers as well, is that you're somebody that plays a lot of games is the 30-year-old dude in his parents' basement who's just yelling at people over Xbox Live and calling them all sorts of unmentionable things. And those people are out there, and people like them who are from all different kinds of demographics are out there, and it's a problem. So, being exposed to that sort of stuff is not pleasant. It's a kind of thing that I don't want my kids necessarily exposed to. Real racist, homophobic, sexist, all kinds of that awful kinds of language that can come across there. It is something, that people sort of have to get exposed to eventually in the world. But, do you want to sit down for 3 or 4 hours and sort of listen to that sort of thing? Or do you want to just turn your mic off when you play the latest competitive shooter? Or
I'd be curious to hear if you have any insight into like, because one of our goals at Love Thy Nerd is to be like, it's in the name, like we want to be really good neighbors to people who are engaged in gaming and nerd culture. And so one of our goals is to like promote, like for lack of a better word, like to promote goodwill, and encourage people to be better online, like to be better to one another. And like you said, toxicity is a big problem in gaming culture right now. Do you have any like tips or whatever about how to encourage that? How people who are listening to this podcast can be, can encourage? I mean, we're not gonna, like, trolls are really hard to change their minds on things, but how can we promote, more kindness?
Yeah, and you're right that like trolls are people who set out to deliberately be awful because they get a kick out of it, or it's some sort of social status thing to them where they're trying to impress other people. Like, I don't know how much you can do about those people except mute them or don't associate with them. But I think in a lot of situations, it comes down to the psychology of what we call de-individuation, where you feel like you're part of a crowd and your identity kind of gets lost in that crowd, and you start to take on the identity of the people around you, or you start to look for clues on how to behave in this kind of strange, uncertain situation by looking at what other people around you are doing. And so when you get in situations like that, you get more susceptible than normal to those kinds of suggestions or clues or stimuli, things around you. And that's why, you may play a game, and if it's a very war-oriented game where you're being very aggressive, or it's a sports game where you're being very aggressive, and that may sort of set up the expectation that like, okay, maybe this is a direction that you can go if you don't know how to behave or what to say. Maybe you can talk trash. So one way to kind of short circuit that, if you're a gamer, is to try to get out ahead of that situation and be friendly proactively, right? So if you set the tone for the conversation and that exchange and that social situation, people who are looking for guidance on how to behave, even subconsciously, will see you being friendly to your other teammates and being friendly to them, and they'll be more likely to behave that way, or at least maybe to not behave in a different way. There's been some experiments. Riot Games, who make the MOBA League of Legends, did some studies where they looked at like, okay, what if we take like 3 people who are friends, like they're on a friends list together, and so they're relatively nice to each other, and then we pair them with we fill out the rest of the group with strangers, so that like the friendly people are in the majority and the strangers are in the minority. And they found that when they did that, the 2 other people in the group or whatever would look to that situation and see like, okay, these people are being chill, they're being friendly, or if they are trash talking, it's done in a way that's very clearly like good natured. Kind of ribbing that you might find among friends. And the researchers there found fewer examples of bad language or objectionable language, or people reporting others for abuse in those kind of situations.
That's a really simple thing that we can all make an effort to do. I think it goes a long way every little bit. So that's cool. Well, we've talked for almost an hour here, and we didn't really get into any personal questions, but I do want to ask if you've still got some more time to chat, a few personal questions about your background. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Born in Oklahoma City, moved to Tulsa by the time I was about 3, I think.
Okay. All my family
with my mom and dad and sister
from Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, what part?
Yeah, Ponca City and Blackwell.
I know where Ponca City is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I still go to Ponca City every now and then to visit my grandmother. So yeah.
So yeah, I lived.
Did you like growing up in that area, or was it like, I got to get out of this place?
I lived there until actually I went to college at the University of Tulsa there. So I stayed there until I went to graduate school. So until I was like 21, almost 22. And I liked it. It was a good place. It's a big enough city that you got pretty much everything you'd want in terms of amenities and entertainment and facilities and so forth. Yeah. So it was nice. And my mom's family was from a little tiny town called Sulphur, Oklahoma. That's southeast of Oklahoma City. And we would go there for big family gatherings like Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah. Sounds probably like what my experiences were going to Blackwell and Oklahoma and Ponca City.
Ponca City. Yep. That just sounds like a city in Mario.
I think it's
get the Ponca hat when you clear that.
I think it's an American native term or name.
The Ponca part.
I think that's where, the
not so much
part.
the city,
not the city. Yeah. but yeah. What did your parents do growing up?
So my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She raised me and my sister. My dad was a loan officer in a bank. So he was a banker. And by the time I was a teenager, he was like a senior vice president. But I think like everybody that works at a bank is like a senior vice president. I think like they give those titles out to like everybody. But I get the impression that he was kind of high up.
Kind of a big deal.
In the bank. Kind of a huge deal, yeah.
Did you grow up going to church or anything like that?
So I was raised Southern Baptist. Like most of the people in Oklahoma or in Tulsa at that time anyway. We kind of grew up in the church there. And then when I ended up going to college, even there at the University of Tulsa, I kind of dropped away from that and, stopped going to the church that I'd gone because like all of my friends that I'd been in like youth group with sort of dispersed, right? So they all went to like college in different places. And then I kind of stopped going to that church about the time that I went off to college.
It's a really common thing. I'm working on a research project actually about why people leave the church in college, and the current statistics are like 66% Yeah. So by the time you graduate college, 66% of people who were teenagers who were involved in church, like in their high school years, by the time they graduate college or whether they go to college or not, by the time they're like 21, 66% of them are no longer in the church.
And that was about the time that I also stopped keeping in touch with my high school friends, right? For a lot of the same reasons, is that they went off. And these were the days before Facebook and social media. So we didn't even have that to keep us connected.
So it wasn't really like a theological or even necessarily like philosophical thing of things you didn't like about it necessarily. It was just kind of like
it was a little column A, a little column B. To tell you the truth. So growing up in that church, it was extremely conservative, and I kind of had clashes with a lot of the people a lot of the adults there and parents and so forth. So
like when you were in high school, you had clashes, or
middle school and high school, but more so probably in high school.
Can you give us an example? I'm curious of like what a clash would be.
Like some of those people,
like you were playing Quake, and they were like, "Quake's evil."
No, it didn't have anything to do with that. It was more around like popular music, for example. So, like we would go on these mission trips where
they didn't know what Quake was.
No, this was like a good 10 years before Quake came out. Maybe I'm dating myself.
Oh, okay.
But this was like the early to mid 80s. That this would have been because I started college in 1990. So like we went on like a missionary trip, and we would do these things, and we would like go to the Wisconsin Dells or like drive down to someplace in Texas and partner with like a church there, and we'd go out and to like public parks, and we'd try to get people to come, and we would do like Bible stories for the kids, and
like backyard Bible
exactly,
club
it was like a roving backyard, like a roving VBS, Vacation Bible School, and then like the adults in the group would try to tell people about Jesus and the church and proselytize to them and all that sort of stuff. And these were a lot of fun because it was like we got to go hang out with our friends, and we do this sort of stuff during the day, and then we'd have fun at night. And but I made the cardinal sin of bringing my Walkman, again, dating myself a little bit, my Walkman cassette tape player with my new copy of Hysteria by Def Leppard, and a couple of other cassettes of Van Halen and so forth, this music that I loved.
Devil music.
And I got in a lot of trouble with that, and they took it away and gave me a good scolding. And then like when we came back, they wanted me to read this book about like basically how the devil was like corrupting youth through rock and roll music. And it's probably something that like today you could replace rock and roll music with video games, and it would be largely the same conversation that we were having earlier. So maybe there's my answer. But he the leader of our youth group tried to get me to read this book, and I actually did like skim through it. And even like at that age, I was like, this is complete balderdash. Like this is barely legible. Like this person can barely string sentences together, and it's all like pearl clutching, and it makes no sense. And he's ascribing things that are very literal. And it's not like I could say like, oh, I was a junior psychologist budding, there, and I wanted more empirical proof. It wasn't anything like that. It was just like, this is absolutely like nuts. And they were like, you need to like write an essay about this book and tell me why you were wrong to.
They told you to
bring this stuff. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they were like, well, no, you have to. And we're going to go get your mother. And so I was like, be my guest, man. And so they went and like got my mom and had like a conversation with her. And she took like one look at the book, and she was like, he's right. This is ridiculous. He's not going to do this.
Oh man. Way to go.
She
Mom.
was great.
Like,
she was rad. Like very liberal in a lot of ways, like socially liberal. Cool. But she grew up in the church, and she took it very seriously, and she was very active in the church. But yeah, even she took one look at that and was like, no, you guys were right to take the cassette player away from him because you had told him like before you even left that these things weren't allowed. So he broke that rule, and I get that, but like, let's leave it there. But she was, she was great. Like I was into Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, and she totally supported me there.
I mean, that was the thick of that whole panic.
Yep, that was the age for it, right? When Tom Hanks was in TV movies about kids getting like caught up in Dungeons and Dragons.
You're in the thick of it.
But she was like, he's like reading, and he's playing with his friends. Like,
dude, this story is why 66% of people leave the church.
It's part of it for sure.
When they get out, like, ugh.
Yeah. The research that I was looking at says a lot of people just kind of leave. They don't really have a good reason for it necessarily, but there is some research that I've seen that's like connected to perceptions about judgmental attitudes and that kind of thing. I think it's different. I think those are a lot less severe. Like, thankfully, I'm not hearing any stories these days of churches trying to make people write essays. Yeah. just like, that's got to be a surefire.
But today it would be like, you need to write a tweet about what you did, why what you did was wrong.
Yeah. Post on Instagram. Yeah. Make your Snapchat right. story about why you're. Oh gosh! And if you forced a kid to do that on Snapchat, they would never. That would be it. They would be done with the church forever.
Yeah. So it was just. But yeah, it was a lot of repeated stuff like that, and then there was some like very thinly veiled like racism and those types of views from certain people in the church. It wasn't widespread, and this was like nothing that I would expect to happen from my family or other people in there, but like it kept coming up, and I'm like, these people are like in charge. You're putting them in charge of activities and in positions of authority and that sort of stuff. So I kind of just didn't go back. But actually, like when I was in college, I started dating this girl who would go on to become my wife, and she was she'd grown up Catholic, and so. Now, like these days, both of our girls are Catholic, and we go to Catholic Mass every Sunday, and I go with them, and I support them and all that sort of stuff. I haven't gone so far as to convert to Catholicism because I have some very specific problems with the Catholic Church and their dogma and doctrine and some of their politics. But on the surface, most of what they had to say is the best of what was being said in the Baptist Church, about how to treat people well, how to take care of people who are disenfranchised and out of luck and in need of help, and how to, apply all of the lessons that Jesus had for those types of things. Although occasionally he'll get up there and he'd be, the priest will be like, okay, now I'm going to tell you why homosexuality is wrong. And he'd go on for 20 minutes. Trigger. Yeah. And my wife and I would look at each other and we were like, okay, we're having a conversation with the girls on the way back home after this. And like, this is why the priest was wrong on this particular topic. And, or he'd get up there and talk about, here's why women can't be priests, or here's why, birth control should be not allowed, and that kind of stuff. So there are certain hot button topics that we greatly disagree with, but in general, like, I'm happy that they're getting that upbringing and they're getting.
So do you have I know you kind of had the falling out with your Baptist upbringing, which we've talked about, and then now you've sort of landed in this place where you're going to church, but you're not completely bought in. You see the value in it, which I think is, I appreciate you like admitting that you see value in it. Would you classify yourself as like where are you on the belief spectrum or whatever? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, I'm going to need some anchors on this scale.
Between Richard Dawkins and Mother Teresa.
Well, I've got a whole separate set of beef with Richard Dawkins. But we all. No, I mean, above the midpoint, definitely. So, I believe in God, and I believe that the Bible has some very valuable lessons on how to live and how to treat other people. I think that it is silent on many other issues that we have to make up our minds for ourselves and figure out ourselves based on where society is now, and sort of taking a larger application of, hey, just be excellent to each other, to quote either Bill or Ted. I forget which one.
That's a really important point of that I think the church is having to deal with these days, and that I think the church really needs to grapple with, is just this reality that the Bible doesn't speak to everything. Like, there's
careful who you say that to, Satanist.
Now write an essay explaining why you're wrong.
I have a pretty high view of the Bible, actually, but I think it's really important that we recognize that there's just a lot that, like, and also being an expert, quote unquote, expert on the Bible doesn't make you an expert on everything. Like, there's a lot of things that we need to be comfortable saying, like, the Bible doesn't really give us answers there. We have to just do our best and use some wisdom and make sure, like, we're upholding the greatest commandment, to love God and to love our neighbor. Like, and just do our best here. There's a lot of issues that would be resolved or that would be helped, at least, I guess, if we could realize that, I think.
Speaking of the Bible, like one of the things that caused my wife and I to sort of fall in love with the church that we're at is we started going there when the pastor was teaching through the series that he titled Time Bound and Timeless. And I think it's terms that he picked up from a book that he read. I can't remember the name of it. And basically this idea that the Bible is like an ancient book written in an ancient time for ancient people. That's the time bound part of it. And there are a lot of things in there that are very specific to a very specific time, to a very specific people.
Especially the Old Testament.
Yeah. And yet there are also many, many passages that are timeless that have, especially Jesus stuff like Sermon on the Mount or any number of things that it's like these still apply and these are still valuable and pertinent to living life as a Christian. And then beyond that, many are both. There are time-bound and timeless aspects of many passages in there. And our job as Christians is to try to parse that stuff out and figure out where are the things that are timeless and where are the things that we like, these weren't issues that they were dealing with back then. That's just the reality of it. And we have to figure out what our response is going to be.
At that point, it's more about what are the values that you take away of how you treat people and what you want their lives to be like, and then how does that inform these new decisions that you got to figure out?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much because there'll always be somebody that gets upset when you start talking about the Bible. But I think it's important to realize just because you see something as time bound in the Bible doesn't mean it doesn't have value or that we're saying that you shouldn't read it. It's just we need to realize that the Bible is a really old book. It's a really ancient book and it's written.
I'm doing the Thomas Jefferson translation.
There you go. Yeah. But that's cool. It's great to hear your story. What are your parents? I mean, you said your parents are your parents still around?
My mother is. My father died 10 years ago. Gosh, 12 years ago, 2006.
Yeah, sorry to hear that, man. But I'd be curious to hear about you. You said your mom was always been pretty active and involved. What's your relationship with her regarding these things and the work that you do? And
it's great. I mean, she doesn't get it. So. She doesn't understand anything about video games. Or she never really did. And currently she's actually she's 83 and she's developed dementia. So she's not all quite there mentally anyway. So yeah, it's not like we have a whole lot of conversations about this stuff recently, but she was always proud of me and excited for, when I was in college and doing well enough there to get into graduate school and then eventually getting my PhD. She was super excited and loved all that sort of stuff. Both her and my dad totally supported my video game habits and interests. My dad bought me my Atari 2600 from Toys R Us back in the day, and they would give me pocket money to go down to the arcade or drive me down there.
Neither of those things exist anymore, Ataris or Toys R Us.
They're Atari comes out with these little mini collections periodically, but generally so. So they were always, would support me however they could and didn't have a problem
because
with any of
obviously
that
the
stuff.
church you were in did. So
and back in those days, video games was not part of the conversation because they were just they weren't as realistic or generally as violent or the term addiction didn't get thrown around in that context. It was more about popular media and Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of stuff. That was
cool.
Well,
it's been great having you on, man. I really
this was
hearing
fun.
Your story and hearing your perspective on the value of games and all that kind of stuff. I realized as you brought up addiction that we never did talk about the World Health Organization's decision to include gaming disorder, which was something that was on our agenda. We may have to have you on. We've thought about eventually doing some kind of roundtable podcast about that topic of addiction because it's such a I think it's almost replaced violence as the hot button.
It's the new moral
thing
panic
that people. Yeah, it's the new moral panic, And, like I said, one of our goals with Love Thy Nerd is just like to educate people, give them some bearings on these things so they know how to be good neighbors and that kind of thing. So if we do that, we may reach out to you to be a part of that round table.
Yeah, hit me up. I'd be game. No pun
we'll
intended.
double what we paid you for this podcast.
Okay, triple, and we got a deal.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, thanks so much. This has been great. Be sure to go check out Jamie's work at psychologyofgames.com.
That's right.
And also, are you on Twitter? Anything else you'd mention?
Yeah, Twitter at Jamie Madigan, JamieMadigan, or you can just go to psychologygames.com and there's links there to follow me on Twitter and Facebook and subscribe to the podcast, check out the book, and all that sort of stuff. Psychologygames.com, best place.
Great. And again, the name of the book is Getting Gamers. Subtitle is The Psychology of Video Games and Their Impact on the People Who Play Them. So definitely, I would highly recommend it. I've been getting a ton out of it. It's something I've used in a few articles I've even written. It's really helpful. So go check that out. And check out Love Thy Nerd. Go to lovethynerd.com if you support us. We can't do these things without your support, without financial support. This podcast, our comic podcast, which is called The Pull List, or Free Play, our other podcast, which is kind of a general nerd culture podcast, roundtable kind of podcast. That's great, really entertaining. We can't do these things without your financial support. So consider helping us with a recurring monthly contribution. And if you do, you can come on our podcast and ask really interesting people like Jamie questions. So that's one of the small benefits we offer. But go check it out, lovethynerd.com. Check out our other podcast. Rate and review this podcast on iTunes. That'd be a great way to help us. And yeah, stay tuned for more news on Love Thy Nerd. If you want to join our community, just search for Love Thy Nerd Community on Facebook. And you can join that Facebook group and chat about nerdy stuff to your heart's content. And I think that's it for us. Thanks again.